God's law, according to Robert Solberg. Let me first make this clear, under no circumstances am I trying to slander Robert Solberg's name or reputation, I am just pointing out his false teachings, which have nothing to do with his character. So, who is Robert Solberg? Robert Solberg says that he is a theologian, and to my recollection he stated on one of his videos that he is on a divine assignment. In my opinion, he is most likely on an ego assignment, who appears to be making himself superior to others and drawing them to his teachings, which is the law of God according to Robert Solberg. My brother and I gave a new definition to the question, what is a theologian? A theologian is one who takes the epistles and makes doctrines out of them. Numerous times have I questioned Robert Solberg, and sadly, he appears to only respond to what he believes and avoids answering questions that he knows reflect on his false teachings. What I abhor about Robert Solberg is that in most of his videos, he appears to be attacking God's law deliberately and with full consciousness, even though he disagrees with me. I have already told him that he is eating grass and regurgitating it to feed the Gentile believers, and reminded him of Nietzsche, an atheist, a man who was trying to prove that God did not exist, suffered a mental breakdown, and died without God in his mind. If Robert Solberg continues to aggressively attack God's law, he might one day die lawless. He needs to learn from Nietzsche. One of the things I pointed out to Robert Solberg is that he speaks double-mindedly. I told him that he continues to speak confusedly and double-mindedly, and that the word double-minded comes from the Greek word dipsuchos, which mean a person with two minds or souls, and that it also refers to being split in half, vacillating like a spiritual schizophrenic. I also told him that word dipsuchos appears to reflect a person as having one soul directed toward God and the other toward Satan, one soul inclined to exalt God and the other inclined to turn away from God. To make a statement that God's law are not required but permissible is a diabolical statement, and to teach it is not scriptural. He should be severely reprimanded for making such a statement and teaching such a doctrine. I have concluded that Rob Solberg wants nothing to do with the God of Israel or with God's law, which is why he attacks anyone who observes God's law, though he denies it. Let me also mention that Robert Solberg is ignorant of scriptural truth, and one of his problems is pulling verses out of context. His statement that God's law are now expressed differently because of the work of Yeshua is an opinion that he is giving and not scriptural, and what he is doing is painting a picture to fit his opinion. His statement is like saying the bumblebee no longer has to move from flower to collect pollen and nectar as a food source because now it can collect the pollen in the air. Just like the flower gives life to the bumblebee, Yeshua, referring to the keeping of the law, said to the teacher of the law, "Do this, and you shall live." Just like the bumblebee cannot live without the flower, a believer cannot live without God's law. God's law are essential in one's life. Obedience to God's law allows one to walk a righteous walk before God, not that the law make a person God's righteousness. We are made God's righteousness in Yeshua apart from the law. I understand that salvation is God's free gift and that we are made God's righteousness in Yeshua apart from the law, but there is a righteous walk before God, and obedience to God's law is that righteous walk. If Robert Solberg would take the time to study Romans chapter 8 and allow the Spirit of God to teach him, he would conclude that the carnal mind is enmity against God, for it is not subject to the law of God, nor indeed can it be, and he would also learn that as we walk after the Spirit will fulfill the righteousness of the law. Another thing, if the carnal mind cannot be subject to the law of God, nor indeed can it be, then it makes it clear that those in Yeshua can. Robert Solberg said that the Torah has not been done away with and that the Torah is part of the Holy Scriptures. And that Moses' law are not only holy, but righteous, and good, and that they can't be dismissed, but he adds that they are no longer binding as a body of legal requirements, in other words, that they are not required to be observed but permissible. This is the problem I have with him. He speaks double-mindedly, and as previously stated, his not required but permissible statement is a statement that came straight out of the mouth of Satan. I can continue on, but I want to mention one more thing. Robert Solberg has no understanding of what was going on in the churches of Galatia, and the reason he has no understanding of what was going on is because instead of allowing the Spirit of God to teach him, he leans to his own understanding to fit his personal view, which causes him to deliberately distort true scriptural teachings. In Galatians 2, the Apostle Paul makes it clear what the Pharisees were trying to do, which was to bring the believers into bondage, and you can see this in Acts 15, which tells us that certain men came down from Judea teaching that one must be circumcised after the manner of Moses to be saved. The three false teachings that were going on in the churches of Galatia were that one receives the Holy Spirit by the works of the law, that one is justified by the works of the law, and that righteousness comes through the law. The Apostle Paul understood that they were trying to bring them back into bondage, which is why he wrote the epistle to the churches of Galatia. He was correcting and putting the law in their proper perspective, without dismissing the law. It is sad to say that Robert Solberg has become the Pied Piper for many Gentile believers, and the more he engraves his teaching in the minds of Gentile believers, the more they will not want anything to do with God's law. I have nothing personal against Robert Solberg. He is articulate in his presentation, but what good is it if it is not scriptural? Remember what Yeshua did. He called the Pharisees and scribes hypocrites, then addressed them as fools and blind, and when you read Proverbs 18:2, you understand why Yeshua called them fools. So, what does Proverbs 18:2 say? A fool has no delight in understanding, but that his heart may discover itself. One translation says it this way: fools find no pleasure in understanding but delight in airing their own opinions.